I'm going to turn it over now to our wonderful colleague, Kate Esposito. I think we introduced her briefly earlier, who's our co-director here at CSUDH on the CSU side. Woohoo! Who's amazing, amazing, amazing. And we're super happy to have you. Thank you.
Thank you. So it's really my pleasure to introduce the next panel. Um, as, oops, I think I'm going the wrong way here. Okay, I have to tell my students this, so I'm going to tell you all this. I went to college with a typewriter, and I'm still trying to catch up. All right. So it really is my pleasure. Can we skip to the next one? Yes. So it is my pleasure. I think this morning when Allison spoke with us, she talked about how the initial funding in 2017 was really geared towards preparing teachers to understand our students who have dyslexia and to really provide effective instruction. So we really have our three of our primary founders for that. Dr. Marianne Wolf, who is unfortunately not able to be here today, Dr. Sue Sears, and Dr. Laura Rhinehart. And they're going to speak with us about the connection between neuroscience and really how that plays out in terms of providing effective instruction in the classroom. So with that, I'm going to start and turn it over, and then we will hear a little bit about how we narrow down on the provision of instruction designed are in relation to what we need in the state of California. And then we'll conclude with a little bit of an overview of some of the modules that you will also see on Araya and you will see during the poster sessions at lunch. So with that, I will turn it over.
Great, thank you. Dr. Marianne Wolf was going to present these slides, but I'm going to present them. I'm nowhere near as eloquent, but please be patient with me. And we're going to talk a little bit about research and the reading brain and dyslexia and the connection between the science of reading and neuroscience. And I'm from the Center for Dyslexia, Diverse Learners, and Social Justice at UCLA, where Dr. Marianne Wolf is our director there. And all the members of the center are also members of the collaborative. And here our focus is that literacy is a basic human right, and it's transformative. But we know that not everyone has access to this basic human right, and sometimes that's because of instruction. So one thing that we're working to do is to bring high quality instructional materials to teachers. And so we're working on professional development material around reading development, screening and assessment, instructional materials, and multilingual learners. And all of the materials that we have are really influenced or informed by what we've learned from cognitive neuroscience and education and what decades of research have shown us on the science of reading. And one of the most important things that we've learned from cognitive neuroscience is that, as Marianne Wolf always says, the human brain was never born to read. Although it's primed for language, we really have to, most children need instruction to be able to learn how to read. And so we leverage what we know from neuroscience when we think about the best ways to teach reading. And here's some other things that we've learned from neuroscience and science, kind of, what we know for sure about best practices. One, that this 0 to 5 period, as we just heard about, is so critically important. Two, that screening must happen, and we're very excited that starting next year, kindergartners will be screened for reading difficulties. And third, that early instruction is very important, and this should be informed by the data that we receive from screeners. Fourth, we know that foundational skills are important, that decades of research on the science of reading has shown us that most children really need evidence-based instruction on foundational skills. We also know that we need to progress monitor students to make sure that they're, making sufficient progress with the instruction they're receiving. And then lastly, we know that students need fluency and reading comprehension that will enable them to develop deep reading and also increases empathy. Okay, so I will go ahead and pass it over to Sue, who will talk a little bit more about what this means for children with dyslexia.
Thank you, Laura. And I know we're all disappointed Marianne couldn't be here today, but we're second string quarterbacks, and we'll sometimes they rise to the occasion. I hope we do. I'm going to talk a little bit about the translation of research into practice. And Jenny, I'm going to flip your slide just a tiny bit, shift it, if you will. And I'm going to talk about research to policy to practice, and specifically about how some of the research has been influencing policy in the state of California. When we began this work, as Kate mentioned, in 2020 as sort of this original group focused on literacy, our task, this group of people that I've been working with, and Laura is one of them, and Kai Green, raise your hand, Kai, is one of them, and Renee is one of them, and Lori is one of them. She, unfortunately, I think, or fortunately, she works here, and so I think duty called, and so she had to leave. Brian, where are you? Brian is one of them, and Julie is one of them. And these are the people with other folks from UCLA and the CSUs who are doing this work. When we began, we really had in mind the line from Marianne, which is research on the reading brain and dyslexia helps all children learn to read, and all teachers teach reading. And that has really, I think, guided our work and was in our mind as we began our efforts. And so it's no surprise, probably, that we began looking at the California Dyslexia Guidelines. And the idea was, how can we perhaps elaborate on them, update them? They were done in 2017. And how can we, in some instances, make them more accessible to teachers, teacher candidates, and teacher educators? And so with this in mind, we really began our work. The California Dyslexia Guidelines are an example of the translation of research to policy. They came about because of Assembly Bill 1369, which said to the California Department of Education, develop guidelines for identifying, assessing, and improving educational services to pupils with dyslexia. We did not, I think it's fair to say, anticipate that the importance of this work would be amplified by subsequent state policy. And so I now kind of want to turn my attention to the translation in California policy of research and more recent policy in particular. There we go. I also want to shift from sort of Marianne's insight to some of those principles that Laura was talking about. So you can see a direct translation of research into policy with the passage of the new Pre-K3 Early Childhood Specialist Instruction Credential. How important is that for early childhood? I mean, a real recognition that we need a workforce that is experts in the area of 0 to 5 because of the tremendous and critical development in language, cognition, and social emotional skills of young children. Those next two developmental principles looked at screening, the importance of screening, early identification, and early intervention. I was thinking I spent my last teaching responsibilities as a faculty member in two places, a first grade classroom and a high school classroom. And we all know how much easier it is to turn around, and your data show that, young children than it is to turn around and support adolescents. So I cannot overemphasize the importance of early identification and early intervention. Research to practice, we now have screening, mandated screening for all kindergartners, first and second graders in California. Principles 4, 5, and 6 look at teaching and intervention. And as Laura mentioned, Principle 4 focuses on an expanded view of foundational skills that not only looks at phonology and phonics, but looks at semantics, vocabulary, syntax, and morphology. Principle 5, progress monitoring. Who's making the kinds of gains we want to see and who's struggling to make those gains, and how are we going to support that student within an MTSS framework? And then, of course, Principle 6, the goal of all reading is fluency, comprehension, and meaning making. And now we have Senate Bill 488. These new literacy standards embody Principles 4, 5, and 6. And Standard 7, effective literacy instruction for all students, is mandated for all teaching credentials in the state of California. A direct result of the research to policy to practice. What our group did was we wanted to be able to provide some support for teachers and teacher educators in the implementation of Standard 7, which includes the incorporation of the California Dyslexia Guidelines. And our decision was to develop a series of e-learning modules focused on dyslexia, but not exclusively on dyslexia, and that would meet and help address this new standard. So we have 5 modules which are completed: an introduction to dyslexia, dyslexia in the brain, screening and assessment in dyslexia, multilingual English learners in dyslexia, which Laura's going to talk a little bit about in more depth, and a very comprehensive module on early childhood and dyslexia. And then the one that we're working on and is in development right now is foundational literacy skills. All of these modules adhere to similar design features. So they can be used synchronously or asynchronously. If I were instructing and using it, I might sometimes look at it in class and have a discussion. I might also assign it and then give some sort of a writing reflection or questions, or come back to class and do both a combination of synchronous and asynchronous use. They're designed to be a package. They represent, in some ways, you might say, a coherent and cohesive curriculum, but they also are standalone. So you can pull out any one of those modules and use it with your teachers. You can use it, if you're a teacher educator, in your classes. We think they are interactive, engaging, and welcoming. They are also comprehensive and scholarly. So each module has an exhaustive list of readings, resources, and references, and they are freely accessible. So for those of you who are involved in teacher preparation, this is how the modules align, or professional development. These are how the modules align with the California Dyslexia Guidelines. So the top row are the modules. The bottom row are the chapters within the California Dyslexia Guidelines. A similar table for how these modules align with the new Standard 7. The modules are in the top row. The teaching performance assessments from Standard 7 are in the bottom row. And we've done similar alignments for each of the individual modules. What I personally like about the modules is that they present a cohesive body of knowledge which is integrated across the modules and linked across the modules. So it is sort of one message, one vocabulary that becomes increasingly familiar to students and to teachers as they engage with them. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Laura, who can give you sort of a flavor of what the most recently finished module, Multilingual English Learners and Dyslexia module, looks like.
Thank you, Sue. So I had the privilege of working on the multilingual and English learners and dyslexia module, and I worked with Kai Green, a professor here and a bilingual speech language pathologist. And this is the module that we created along with Dr. Sears and Dr. Marianne Wolf. And we really wanted to focus on students who may be multilingual learners or English learners, because we heard from teachers that this is something that they can struggle with. How are we untangling what may be language acquisition from what might be a learning disability? And this is also very important because we have so many students who are designated English learners or multilingual. In about a fourth of American households, we have more than one language. And in California, it's much, much higher. So this is an overview of what the module looks like. Once you click on, you'll see an introduction, information about language differences, and learning to read in English. And then we have effective literacy instruction, and we broke it down for thinking about MTSS or multi-tiered systems of supports. So part 1 is tier 1, and part 2 is tier 2 and tier 3. And then we have some resources and kind of like a case study. And we didn't forget about our dialectical learners too, that we know there are a lot of bilingual students, but dialect really matters a lot. And we use some research from Dr. Julie Washington at UC Irvine to talk a little bit about dialect. So this is what the part 1 focuses on. We have quotes here, but then we also have some practical resources for how to strengthen tier 1 resources for students who are designated English learners who may also have dyslexia. And then for students, based on screening, if they need extra support in tier 2 and tier 3, we have a lot of resources all freely available for tiers 2 and tiers 3. And then finally, we end with some an applied practice activity where, what we heard from teachers, what types of things their students may be struggling with. And here's an example and what we would recommend. Okay, and we have much more information about our modules. You can hear about them during lunch. And if you're interested in learning more about our task force, please check out the QR code, which will also be available in the program.
And I know I speak for all of us who were working on the Standard 7 literacy certification that we really appreciated all of that work. Do we want to just take one quick question? Does anybody, burning questions we could answer? Maybe one or two quick questions? Yes. Got your teacher voice? Okay.
I have a question about talking to children and families about dyslexia. Because dyslexia isn't a specific eligibility, when kids are, identified as having a learning disability and provided an IEP, those conversations often are kind of limited by the eligibility language. And so, as a teacher or a school psychologist even, it's hard to bring in dyslexia because it's like, wait. Nobody diagnosed dyslexia in this kid officially. So I was just wondering your thoughts on, even empowering children around understanding, their own neurodiversity and also helping their families to understand those, but also kind of staying in your lane as an educator and not as a psychologist and not, like how do you guys see that the language of dyslexia?
I'll start, and then I'll turn it over to Laura. I want to address one part of your question, which is I think that helping children understand what is the nature of the struggles that they're having, to whether it's a diagnosis or just saying this is something that really is truly going on. It's not made up in your head. Can really be empowering for students. And so I think acknowledging the struggle, always acknowledging the struggle, supporting the struggle, figuring out ways to help kids not struggle so much in a family is really important. And then, focusing on children's strengths. What do they do well? And using that to leverage where they're having some trouble. Big fan of families.
Thank you for your question. I would say that there are wonderful books about dyslexia. There's a researcher at Harvard, Nadine Gaab, and if you go to her website, Gaab Lab, Gaab Lab, she has a wonderful list of books about dyslexia. And the second thing I'll say about the policy of not saying dyslexia is I don't know if that will change. I know there are some states, Tennessee actually has a law called Say Dyslexia, where in their public schools they do put dyslexia. I think Texas does something similar. So things may change and, learning from other states. I think Texas and Tennessee also have some really nice resources for talking to children and, of all ages about dyslexia.
Because we can and do say dyslexia. It's just that it's not inherent in the discussion of the students' learning disability. It's within the IEP process. So it becomes difficult unless the school psychologist initiates the conversation and everybody's in the loop. It becomes difficult as a practitioner to have a real conversation about what's happening when we're not using uniform language.
Yeah, I think that's good feedback too as we continue to develop content. So thank you. Thank you both. Thank you, three, too, because you're going to tell Marianne how great she did. Oh, one last question before you leave. Thank you.
I recognize that you are not openly allowed to say that the child has dyslexia, but we have the psychologists oftentimes will say that there's a central auditory processing disorder with dyslexia and life characteristics.
Well, unfederal law dyslexia is considered a specific learning disability. So,
But we're not allowed to call it. We're not allowed to say it as teachers
or to diagnose it, because the term is specifically identified in IDEA. So it may be a district, or it may be an urban myth. I don't know. But I think it's definitely then something for us really to think about and really think about how it is why language is so important and naming, because it also, I think my experience working with students is that when they have a label that matches what they're feeling, then they feel like, oh, I'm not the only one. So, all right. Thank you.